Welcome to Collins French with Paul Noble. Content copyright Paul Noble 2010.
I'm Paul Noble. Over the years, I have taught many people. Curiously, they have each had much the same story to tell regarding their previous experiences of language learning. As a result, these days, when I first start a teaching session, I ask my students to raise their hands if they have had any of the following experiences. Raise your hand, I say, if you studied a language for several years at school, but came out unable to really say anything. Or, if you have ever bought a language course and given up around page 30, somewhere around chapter 2. Or if you have ever felt more confused by a teacher's explanation of the language than by the language itself. Perhaps you've been amazed by just how closely grammar books resemble furniture assembly instructions. Or you may have felt that you are in fact more or less incapable of learning a foreign language. Invariably, when I ask these questions, all the students soon have at least one hand in the air, and they laugh. They laugh because for some reason our language learning experiences tend to be very similar. And sadly, these similar experiences tend not to be very good ones. My own initial experiences of language learning were also uncannily similar to those I've just described. In fact, when I ask my students these questions, my own hand is the first to go up, and it stays up until we have gone through them all. However, these less than positive experiences have had an upside both for myself and for those individuals I have taught. Because these experiences, along with a number of other factors, have helped inform and shape the method that will be used during this course. Using this method, you will learn how to communicate in French and how to formulate your own ideas and thoughts using French. As you learn with it, you will quickly discover that I do not use complicated grammatical explanations at all, and I will not ask you to memorize long lists of vocabulary. The way the course is structured will by itself ensure that you remember what you are taught. Instead, through your interaction with the CDs, I will lead you through the French language, enabling you to build up complex sentences by yourself, step by step, so that you are actually speaking independently in French by the end of the course. And this is regardless of how little or how much you know when you begin. You will also discover that the language I teach is designed to be adaptable, so you will be able to use it just as easily for holidaying in a French-speaking country as for living or working in one. It will be just as easy to use it to order a coffee as to hold a conversation with the waiter who brings it to you. And again, all of this regardless of how little or how much you know when you begin. This method has already proved extremely successful with a very great many students, including hundreds of so-called no-hopers. Interestingly, not one of these students failed to learn using this method. It is these many success cases, letters of thank you, and even the occasional hug that have made teaching languages so very worthwhile for me, and it is this that has persuaded me to publish my courses here for the first time. I anticipate and hope that they will be as effective for you as they have been for so many of my other students. Au revoir, and good luck. Before we begin, I do need to establish 3 parameters, or 3 main ground rules, for you to follow when you use the course. The first is that I want you to take time to think out your answers when you're doing the course. Natural length pauses have been included in the course anyway, but if you feel you need longer to think out or work out your answer, simply pause the course and think about it for a moment. The second ground rule, and perhaps the most important, is that I don't want you to make an effort to remember the things I'm teaching you. In fact, strange as it might sound, it doesn't particularly bother me if you forget something when I first introduce it. The reason for this is that when people try to memorize things, perhaps lists of vocabularies or grammar rules or something like that, they tend not to be able to actually use them when they're speaking the language. They cram them into their heads, but they're not necessarily able to use them very easily. And actually, they still tend to forget them at the crucial moment. The way that we remember things so that we actually retain them and can use them is through usage and through being introduced to something again and again. For instance, if you follow a sport or a program on the television, you'll find you know all about the people who participate in that, whether it's people who play sports or whether it's actors in a drama. You'll know all about them, but you will never have made a conscious effort to actually memorize their names or what it is they do on the program. Instead, by seeing the same program again and again, slowly over time, you'll simply remember it. And that's what will happen in this course. I'll introduce certain concepts, certain words, and you'll hear them and you'll use them, and then we'll forget about them for a moment, and I'll let you forget about them. Later on in the course, I'll bring them up a second time, by which point you might well not remember them. But it's this exact action of you being reminded of something and then allowed to forget it, and then reminded again, and then allowed to forget it, and then reminded again, that will eventually allow you to remember what I've taught you by itself. You won't need to try to remember any of it. You won't need to try to memorize any of it. All you need to do is take part in the course and trust that I will bring it up again later and will remind you so that by the end of the course, you remember it automatically without ever actually having tried to remember anything. This is what I do with my students, and this is what I'll do with you here. The final ground rule is that I don't want you to worry about making mistakes. When you learn a new language, you will inevitably make mistakes. And I think that because we get so used to speaking our own languages perfectly, we find it very hard, particularly as adults, to make mistakes when we're speaking out loud. You'll find, however, that the beauty of using this method is that you will instantly know when you've made a mistake, and you'll also find out why. This will allow you to change what you're doing and to make rapid progress in the language. And so by making these mistakes and knowing how to correct them yourself, you'll find that you very quickly go from a non-speaker of the language to being someone who can communicate in it with a surprising degree of confidence, even after just a few hours of studying it. So again, to sum up these 3 ground rules, firstly, take your time to work out your answer and to think about it. If you need to pause the course, you can do that, it's fine. Go at your own pace. Second ground rule is, don't sit there trying to remember what it is I'm teaching on the course. Just go with the flow of the course. Take your time to do it, but don't sit there worrying you've forgotten a word. I'll actually be expecting you to forget some of the things as I teach you, so that I get a chance to remind you of them later, and they will come up again, and you will be reminded of them until you remember them. Without making any effort on your part to do so, you will simply know those words and those rules by the end of the course. And the final rule, don't worry about making a mistake. We learn from mistakes and we benefit from them, particularly when we're learning to speak a second language. So, don't worry about any of these things. Leave your learning of the language to me. And now, let me introduce Marion.
Bonjour.
Who's come here all the way from Normandy to help perfect our French pronunciation. Although you may be only vaguely aware of it, English and French are in fact very closely related languages. I think we're all aware of what happened in 1066, or at least most of us are. There was an invasion in Britain into England by the Normans, and the Normans spoke French, and they brought French to the British Isles. As a result of that, it has left a linguistic legacy in English, which is that 5 or 6 out of every 10 words in English have come into English through French. This gives us a big advantage when learning French, if we utilize these words, that is. I mean, frequently that's not the case, but we will be using them here because they are one of the biggest advantages we have as speakers of English. You'll find that these words tend to be the longer ones in English. The shorter words tend to be of Germanic Anglo-Saxon origin. So we have this division in English. Normally, I'd say typically, words 7 or 8 letters in length or longer tend to be of French Latin origin, and shorter than that tend typically to be of Germanic Anglo-Saxon origin. And what it means is it's very easy to use these longer words for it when English speakers are speaking French. Not only this, but there are also more recent French additions to the English language, which still feel French. For instance, you may be familiar with terms such as c'est la vie, which means that's life. You may also have heard the expression, as we pronounce it déjà vu. It's a slight mispronunciation in English, but we're familiar with it. Literally, it actually means already seen. So when we say we've got déjà vu, we mean, I feel like I've already seen that before. And there are quite a few expressions, and they're useful too. And we'll be using them where they're relevant to learning and to speak the French language competently. Finally, there's another group of words which are very useful for English speakers. And these words are a group of words that are still expanding. They're English words that have gone into French since the end of the Second World War. And so these may well be familiar to you. For instance, you may be familiar with
le week-end.
Yeah, le week-end, which I'm sure you can guess what that means. Another one is
le parking.
Can you guess what that means? That's car park, or parking lot if you're from North America. Another one is
le living.
Le living actually means the living room. You'll find that actually a lot of these words that have come into French, they often have bits chopped off. Or it will be the same as the English, but with ing added on the end. For instance, another example would be if you saw the word camping written in French. So it would look like the English word camping written down. What would you think that meant? Would you think it meant camping? Okay. Actually, camping, which correctly pronounced in French is
camping.
Yes. So you'll see there's a slight pronunciation difference. Actually is the campsite or the camping site. So these changes in the words are something you get used to. But it's easier to remember something like le camping than it would be a totally foreign word. So these can be useful, and we'll be using these in the course where relevant. So, enough about the history of the French language. Let's get started. I have in French, I have is
J'ai. J'ai.
It sounds a bit like the English letter J, pronounced in a French way. So again,
J'ai.
The word for visited in French, visited, is
visiter.
So again, the word for I have is
J'ai.
And visited is
visiter.
So how would you say I have visited?
J'ai visité.
The Louvre Art Gallery in French is of course
Le Louvre.
So how would you say I have visited the Louvre?
J'ai visité le Louvre.
The park in French is
Le parc.
So how would you say I have visited the park?
J'ai visité le parc.
You have in French is,
Vous avez. Vous avez.
now again, don't worry at this point about trying to remember what it is we've done already. The first thing students will often do when I'm teaching them is they'll panic and think, oh my goodness, I'm going to forget what it is you're teaching me. We're already moving on to something new. But that is exactly what I want. I want you to forget it because I'm going to remind you of it in a few minutes. And if you haven't forgot it, it's hard to remind you. So again, you have is,
Vous avez.
how do you think you'd say you have visited the park?
Vous avez visité le parc.
Have you in French, so to turn you have into a question, you change round the word order, just like you do in English. In English you have, which in French is
Vous avez.
and to ask a question in English, we simply change the you have round and say, have you, which in French become
Avez-vous. Avez-vous.
So how would you say, have you visited the park?
Avez-vous visité le parc?
What about, have you visited the Louvre?
Avez-vous visité le Louvre?
The word for prepared in French is,
Préparé. Préparé.
how would you say, I have prepared?
J'ai préparé.
The coffee in French, the coffee is,
Le café. Le café.
how would you say, I have prepared the coffee?
J'ai préparé le café.
Again, don't worry too much about trying to remember all this. I'll be introducing a lot of concepts earlier on in order to give you a chance to forget them so that I can remind you of them later. And as we go through this process of you having the words introduced to you, forgetting them, and then being reminded of them again, you'll find that they just start to stick without any effort at trying to remember them or trying to memorize them. They will just stick eventually. Okay, good. To say for you in French is,
Pour vous. Pour vous.
so how would you say, I have prepared the coffee for you?
J'ai préparé le café pour vous.
The roast beef in French, the roast beef is,
Le rose beef. Le rose beef.
so it sort of sounds a bit like the English but pronounced in a very French way. So, how would you say, I have prepared the roast beef?
J'ai préparé le rose beef.
To say for dinner in French, you will say literally for the dinner. The French will always say for the dinner rather than for dinner, which in French is,
Pour le dîner. Pour le dîner.
so how would you say, I have prepared roast beef for dinner, or as the French would say, I have prepared the roast beef for the dinner?
J'ai préparé le rose beef pour le dîner. J'ai préparé le rose beef pour le dîner.
Now it's important to make sure when you're pronouncing dinner in French to pronounce it as,
Le dîner. Le dîner.
it sort of has an A sound on the end. Because it's such a similar word to the English, people will frequently pronounce it, English speakers will pronounce it as dîner or something like that. But it is correctly said as,
Le dîner.
so it's got that A sound at the end. So again, how would you say, I have prepared the roast beef for the dinner?
J'ai préparé le rose beef pour le dîner.
How would you say you have prepared the coffee?
Vous avez préparé le café?
For me in French is,
Pour moi. Pour moi.
how would you say you have prepared the coffee for me?
Vous avez préparé le café pour moi.
You have in French is,
Vous avez.
and this is a perfectly acceptable way to say you have in French. However, as you may have noticed, it was also pronounced as.
Vous avez.
Now, the second pronunciation is the one more typically used by native French speakers, although both are equally acceptable. The basic reason why there's the two options for pronunciation is that in French, typically, the consonant at the end of a word won't be pronounced. And so the word for you in French is vous, which is spelt V-O-U-S, and the S is not normally pronounced. However, for you have, which in French is
Vous avez.
the have begins with a vowel, with A. And so when a word follows it that begins with a vowel, you can, if you want, more or less push the S from the end of the word onto the vowel of the next one. And so you can make vous avez sound instead like
Vous avez.
this is entirely optional and up to you. So what I would say is do what you're more comfortable with, but be aware at least that the French may well pronounce it as
Vous avez.
although if you want, you can also pronounce it as
Vous avez.
if you find it simpler to do so. So, for me in French is,
Pour moi. Pour moi.
so how would you say you have prepared the coffee for me? Now make sure when you're saying this to include all the components. So you'll need you have prepared the coffee for me.
Vous avez préparé le café pour moi.
Now, to turn that into a question, all you need to do is to change the order of the words you have. So again, how would you say you have in French?
Vous avez.
Now let's turn that round and make it into a question. Make it into have you. How would you say have you?
Avez-vous?
So how would you say, have you prepared the coffee for me?
Avez-vous préparé le café pour moi?
How would you say, I have prepared roast beef for dinner. Have you prepared the coffee? So let's start with that first bit with I have prepared the roast beef for the dinner.
J'ai préparé le roast beef pour le dîner.
Again, make sure when you're saying the dinner in French that you pronounce it as
Le dîner.
that sort of A sound at the end of it. Good. And the next part, have you prepared the coffee?
Avez-vous préparé le café?
He has in French is,
Il a. Il a.
how would you say he has prepared the coffee for me?
Il a préparé le café pour moi.
She has in French is,
Elle a. Elle a.
you may be familiar, there's a woman's magazine called Elle, which means she. So if you're familiar with that, that might help you remember it. How would you say she has prepared the coffee for me?
Elle a préparé le café pour moi.
The word for your in French, your, is
votre,
so for example, to say your mother, you would say
votre mère, votre mère.
So how would you say your mother has prepared the coffee?
Votre mère a préparé le café.
So as you can see, in English we would say she has, which is,
Elle a,
and so to say your mother has, you'll say,
votre mère a.
so again, how would you say your mother has prepared the coffee?
Votre mère a préparé le café.
How would you say your mother has visited the park?
Votre mère a visité le parc.
Now make sure to pronounce the word for has very clearly as
A.
So it's actually spelt with just an A, but the A in French is pronounced much more as a sort of an A sound. So not A like in English or A, but more of an A. One more time. Your mother has visited the park.
Votre mère a visité le parc.
Good. Now, if your mother is,
Votre mère,
it should be relatively easy to realize that your father is,
votre père.
one spelt with an M, as in mama, and one spelt with a P, as in papa, or something like that. So they're very similar. One is an M, one is a P. It's common through many languages. So again, your father is,
Votre père.
okay, assuming there's been some sort of disagreement, how would you say, your mother has visited the park, your father has visited the Louvre? So your mother has visited the park, your father has visited the Louvre.
Votre mère a visité le parc. Votre père a visité le Louvre.
The word for preparation in French is
Préparation. Préparation.
As you can perhaps tell, it is similar to the English preparation. In fact, it's spelt almost exactly the same. The only difference is in the pronunciation. You'll also perhaps notice the way that preparation is spelt in English. Now, the last three letters on the English word preparation are I-O-N. So the last three letters on preparation are I-O-N. Now, words in English which end in I-O-N have actually come into English via French. There are around 1,250 of them in English. And if you know that word in English, then it more or less means that you know it in French. The only issue is working out how to pronounce it correctly. And this isn't that difficult. If we take a word like preparation in English and simply change the way we pronounce the ation at the end, we will find the French. Okay, ation in English, in French, will instead be pronounced
Action. Action.
Make that change and you find the French word. So, for instance, how do you think you'd pronounce reservation in French?
Réservation.
Let's try another one. What about decoration?
Décoration.
So very clearly at the end, that ation becomes
Action.
As long as you make that change, you have access to 1,250 words in French, and it only takes a few seconds to learn. Let's try another one, but slightly more tricky this time. We're going to try invitation, except we need to know in this case that in at the front of a French word is actually pronounced
Un.
My co-teacher Marion likes to refer to this as the sulky teenager sound. It's sort of the I hate you. I like that description. It's a very easy way to remember how to pronounce it. So again, in is pronounced
Un.
So how would you say invitation in French?
Invitation.
So it's a matter of actually getting several different pronunciation elements correct together. But all it takes is a bit of practice. As soon as you can pronounce them correctly, you know the word in French. Now, these words that end in ION are very useful in that they give you 1,250 very easy words that you can use in French immediately. However, they are even better than that. If you take a word, for instance, like preparation, you can make it into the past tense in French. You can make preparation into prepared, and it's very easy to do so. What we're going to do is we're going to take the English word preparation and we're going to cut off that ation at the end. We're going to get rid of ation. We don't want it anymore. So we're going to cut the ation of preparation, and in its place we're going to add what I like to call the cafe E. Now, you'll be familiar with the letter, the cafe E, obviously from the word cafe, from which I take its name. Because at the end of the word cafe, you'll see there's an E with a little accent on the top. That E, in English as well, with the accent on, gives the sound A. Because we don't pronounce cafe as cafe, which we would if there was no cafe E on the end. We pronounce it as cafe, so it's got that A sound on the end. What we're going to do here, therefore, is we're going to cut off the ation from preparation, and in its place, we're going to add the cafe E. So, get rid of the ation off the end of preparation, and in its place put the cafe E. What word will you then have?
Préparer.
Which is the word we've already been using, which means prepared. So, how would you say I have prepared?
J'ai préparé.
Make sure again, when you're pronouncing I have, to pronounce it
J'ai. J'ai.
So again, it's like the English letter J really, but pronounced in a very French way. All right, now going back to the ION words, in English we have visitation. Let's cut off the ation from visitation, and again add the cafe E in its place. What word do we then get?
Visiter.
Which means visited. So, how would you say I have visited?
J'ai visité.
How would you say decoration in French? The full word decoration.
Décoration.
So that's the full word decoration.